Hello everyone and welcome to this video, which is in our Reengineering the Chess Classic series. I'm Grandmaster Matthew Sadler and we're taking a look at a stunning game played between the great Rudolf Spielmann and the Swedish player Gideon Stahlberg, played in 1933. This was a match in actual fact, and Stahlberg surprisingly beat Spielmann by 3-1 with 4 draws. This is game 4, and Stahlberg had scored an early win in the first game, and so he was leading by 1-0. I'm reading a fantastic book at the moment about Stahlberg, and just enjoying following all the rabbit holes that the book can send you into, and obviously interested very much in Stahlberg's best games, but also a number of very good games were played against him by some great players, and this is a really nice one. So let's have a look how that all went. So it was d4, d5, knight f3, c5, and now e3, Collet system. Slightly surprising, maybe, if you know Spielmann a little bit, because he's really known as a great romantic, played many King's Gambits, and many gambits in general, and known as a great combinative player. So a little bit strange to see him playing a quiet opening like this. But I mean, as the years developed, he kind of got stronger as he got older, at least a much more rounded style. And I mean, by the time 1933 here, he was playing extremely strongly, but just a little bit more normally, mostly, than he did. But still, as you'll see, with a lot of creativity. Stahlberg's reaction here was quite interesting. It was to take on d4. Quite unusual, and actually what that means is that we transpose back into an exchange Slav, which is not a bad result if you start off with the Collet. Stahlberg played bishop g4, and this very early bishop g4, I have a feeling that it was kind of a mania in the late 1800s and early 1900s, that people tended to move their bishops to g4 in all sorts of openings very early. Vienna opening, and also the Rai Lopez openings as well. You see that an awful lot. I don't think that's quite as common nowadays, apart from people who play the Trompovsky, of course. It's a little bit strange to do it this early. I mean, the engines just want to play h3 and get black to give up the bishop pair, and then sort of develop after that. You put the bishop to d3, pawn to c3, knight to d2, the queen comes to e2, the knight comes to f3, and this sort of very typical regrouping. White just claims that you've got a slight slight edge because of the 2 bishops. One interesting idea is that if you go knight f6, then Gawain Jones in his coffee house repertoire books suggested knight e5, which is also quite interesting. Actually, I mean, the idea is quite similar again. You're going to try and play a bishop b5 check, get black to play bishop d7, and then grab the bishop pair, and then just play this structure with the bishop pair. Not aiming for much, but just a little bit there. But anyway, after bishop g4, Spielmann played bishop f4. Which is a very normal move in this sort of line. Get the bishop outside the pawn chain, stop the queen from coming to c7, which is always a comfortable square, and maybe think about, and you'll see that later, playing the queen to b3 to attack b7, and just make it a bit more tricky for black to defend the b7 pawn comfortably. The b7 pawn's a little bit weak, of course, because the bishop came out to g4 early. Knight c6, c3, e6, and then queen to b3, at once hitting that pawn on b7. And the idea is that bishop takes f3, queen takes b7 might be awkward. Now, Stockfish shocked me a little bit here, actually, because it suggested the move bishop d6 here. And after queen takes b7, bishop f4 takes king f8, and was quite willing to play this position. Very murky position. Rook b8, queen a4, queen b6. Not wanting to take the pawn on b2, by the way, because of queen a3 check. Got to be careful about those. Queen b6, b3, queen c7. hitting that pawn on c4, c4, and then draw agreed, torch against Stockfish. All very murky indeed. Yeah, I mean, white's got some weak dark squares there, you know, and the white queen's a little bit offside, but yeah, who knows somehow. But yeah, I was rather interested that Stockfish went for this bishop d6 idea. Stockfish also went for the move that Stahlberg played, queen d7, and so did Torch. Now the engines were very keen to play knight e5 here straight away and get rid of that knight on f3. You're also threatening bishop d5 here, which is quite nice. So the knight comes round to e7, and then we go knight d2, knight c6, bishop g3. But yeah, the engines clearly felt that white's kingside pieces didn't have that much scope, and there needed to be some exchanges just to free yourself a little bit. Spielmann didn't do that. He played knight bd2, queen d7, knight bd2. And now Stahlberg played knight e7. So yeah, looking to develop to g6, hit the bishop on f4, control the e5 square. Not a bad idea. The engines preferred the move f6, which I always like in these type of positions. And it just, I mean, it really restricts these two pieces very nicely. You know, I mean, the taking away the e5 square, you know, sort of makes a bit of a logjam in the pieces here. You know, this knight can't move away, otherwise you'll go bishop f3. And where does this knight on f3 go now? You know, so I think that's a very, very nice move indeed. And yeah, I mean, either looking to play knight to e7 and g5, develop like that, or there was a game where Torch against Stockfish, bishop g3 was played, and then knight h6 to f5 or to f7. Just a very comfortable position for black from the opening. So after knight e7, well, the engines wanted to play the move h3, just to let the bishop retreat back to h2, I guess, after knight g6 happens. But here, Spielmann played something very, very interesting, and it's quite funny, really, that you know, you often look at games and you say, "Oh, wow, X or Y was playing like AlphaZero," but then you know, when you put the games onto the engines are saying, "Well, you know, I wouldn't have pushed the rook's pawn in that particular position," you know. Whereas for you, that just looks like, "Oh, that's just something that that the engines would play nowadays." But in any case, I like this plan very much. Spielmann played the move a4. And what's the idea? Well, he was looking for something fresh, he said. And also, just the idea is to play a5. And, you know, black will play a6. And after that, the b6 square is weak, and also c5 can't be protected very easily. So you might play knight b3 to c5. I mean, you might recall there was a game in the last World Championship between Ding and Nepomniachtchi. And Ding played a London system, I think it was, and got this sort of structure and did exactly that sort of plan, you know, bringing the playing a5 and then bringing a knight into c5 like that. So, yeah, very interesting to see Spielmann, you know, in the 1930s coming up with that sort of plan. Knight g6 was played, and now bishop g3, very natural from Spielmann. And now bishop e7 was played by Stahlberg, and yeah, it's fine. It's a developing move. It's maybe yeah, the way that Stahlberg plays afterwards, it's maybe, yeah, just a little bit solid, routine. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, Stahlberg was a very interesting player, very strong player, but he just had the tendency sometimes not to really, you know, really take a grip of the position and go for it somehow, you know, and you saw that sometimes when he played at the very highest level. You know, he played in a number of candidates tournaments, and you know, really played. He was really one of the top players in the world at some stage. But you just always felt that he was always being just a little bit on the passive side somehow. What the engines want is, as always, something incredibly active, which is to play the move h5. And I mean, what they're looking for, of course, they're looking to trap the bishop. But the idea is that after h3, the engines play bishop f5. Okay, stop a bishop getting to d3 there. And then we can just look at playing a move like h4 and then playing bishop d6, you know, even as a pawn sacrifice maybe. But what's the idea of this? H4, you're attacking the pawn on G3. Bishop D6, you'll get rid of the bishop, the dark squared bishop, and get hold of the F4 square, and that'll enable your knight to come in. And black's just going to get an awful lot of initiative there. Quite interesting that that the engines feel that the best reaction to white's advance of the A pawn on the queen side is to advance a rook's pawn on the king side somehow. Bishop E7 was played by Stahlberg, and now Spielmann played the move H4. Again, not the engine's favourite move. They're looking more at the quiet H3 there. But I mean, I think we can all approve of moves like A4 and H4. Here the idea is much clearer. Of course, there's a knight on G6, so we want to chase it away with H5. How should black react to the advance of the H-pawn? I mean, that is, there always used to be in the old days the conundrum of which rook to place on the open file. Well, that still exists. But I think the conundrum of how to answer a rook's pawn push is actually the modern dilemma. It's that dilemma of our era, because, there are so many possibilities. I mean, you can stop it halfway, or you can just ignore it. And in Game Changer, Natasha and I, we looked at all those different possibilities in detail, about how Stockfish was reacting and how AlphaZero then reacted. It seemed to have a plan for each scenario. In general, AlphaZero preferred to play the move H5, stopping the H-pawn advance as soon as possible. And this is also what Torch and Stockfish wanted to do, just stop that from happening there. There are other ideas. I mean, I was quite interested in Bishop H5, and the engines didn't think that this was bad at all. It's just quite nice, really. I mean, the bishop's not going to get chased away quickly. It's keeping the pressure, sort of cutting across the white position there and just stopping the H-pawn, well, you can plan things later like F6 or whatever. That was also not a bad move. Ignoring it was also quite okay. H5, knight H8. You see these things in the French quite often. Advanced French. The idea is that the knight comes to H8, but you're coming out with F6 and then knight F7, so it's not so bad. That is also quite possible. What Stahlberg did was a little bit weird, really, very clumsy in actual fact. And, from that point of view, you sort of think, well, if you're going to play a move like Bishop F6, which looks a little bit odd somehow in terms of development, also weakens the C5 square, and we know that's going to be a theme, then, you might as well play a move like H5 simply, and rather than putting the pieces a little bit weirdly. But Spielmann went through with H5. The engines wanted A5 in first, and they were expecting A6 and then H5. It doesn't change a huge amount there. But H5, knight E7, and then H6. And it's quite interesting, actually, to see, how should you react to this as well? I mean, this is also another typical dilemma for our ages. How do you react to an H-pawn once it's come all the way there? And well, I mean, actually, what the engines wanted G takes H6 to happen, and they didn't want to allow that H pawn to remain. They wanted to take on H6 like this, and they were throwing in A5 and then A6, and then afterwards, let me just go back because we've transposed to something else there. A5, A6, then Queen B6. What are we preparing there? Well, we're preparing the good old move knight b3 here into c5. Looks pretty ugly for black, doesn't it, really? I mean, I'd be very, very happy with white in this position. Nice bind there, and knight c5 is coming in. So takes, and h4, keeping the pawn safe. And then the engines were looking to play f4 and f5 even, which is quite nice. I mean, you're going to take on here. The knight will come to c5. Eventually, you'll have bishop h3. I mean, the games were ending in a draw, but I mean, I really like White's strategy, and I really like what White was doing there. I felt it was quite tricky, really, for White to deal with, for Black to deal with that. So h6 may be best, but what Stahlberg did, this was pretty imaginative actually. He played the move g5. And what's the idea? Well, the idea is that the knight can come back to g6 now. So he's just tried to absorb this h6 pawn and keep the square on g6 for his knight. Yeah, the only problem is that, if he's going to castle kingside, and that does look the most likely because we've got a little bit of irritating firepower, sort of lined up against the queen side, then this pawn's going to be very weak. The king's going to be a bit weak on the king side somehow. So it's a very double-edged decision, this. So Spielmann played bishop b5, which shows one of the advantages of not playing a5. You can play bishop b5, and obviously he's looking for knight e5 here. And the engines want to play bishop takes f3 quickly, and then just play a6, and just try and swap off, some pieces like this. I think white's a little bit more comfortable somehow, just to start with, because this king side's a little bit weak. But it's not so bad for black. I was actually slightly confused as to, why is black swapping off the knight on f3 now? Why would you want to do that? It's only when thinking back to what Spielmann played against Stahlberg, and also seeing a lot of engine lines as well, that you realise why the engines wanted to take on f3 so quickly. It's quite surprising. So knight to g6 played by Stahlberg, and now knight e5 played. Not the move that the engines wanted. Actually, they wanted to throw in a5 first of all. And after a6, then they wanted to go for the dark squares. So takes, knight e5, knight takes e5, bishop e5 takes and takes. And this is quite interesting. Black's dark squares are an absolute disgrace here with, all of these pawns on here and the light squared bishop as well. But there's just one point in the position that gives black some hope. And it's the e5 pawn, which happens to be quite weak. And black can just play queen c7 and win it. So after castles, queen takes e5. Yeah, I was looking at this and thinking, well, black's fine, isn't he? But the engines were actually giving some sort of advantage for white, 0.76. The engines end up invading on the queen side and doing some stuff, getting pawns back and all that. But I don't know. It's not really. I didn't think it was absolutely amazing for white. But the plan, you understand. It's just try and weaken all the dark squares and then exploit that afterwards. And black's got to react quite smartly to make it happen. So, Spielmann did it a little bit differently. He went knight e5, and after bishop e5, he took back with the bishop, and then takes. But, obviously, the idea is a little bit the same. He can always play a move like bishop takes c6 whenever he wants to, and actually, Stahlberg reacted very smartly as well here. He played the move queen c7, again, spotting that the e5 pawn is weak, castles, and queen takes e5. So what is this position? Pretty crazy, right? Spielmann has sacrificed a pawn. Black's a little bit behind in development. Well, the king's still in the centre. And, the place where the king's most likely to go is a little weak. This pawn is on g5. This h6 pawn is attacking the g7 square. On the other hand, this h6 pawn is quite weak, right? It's quite open to attack by queen f6 takes h6. So, this is quite double-edged somehow. Not 100% obvious how this should be played. Spielmann played the move a5. Not the best according to the engines. The engines wanted to play rook e1. Obviously, for something like queen f6, you're looking at queen takes d5 ideas with the pin there. So queen d6, a5, a6. Takes. And now I have to introduce you to a theme that that's going to crop up in the game, and it's one of the reasons why this move knight e5, this pawn sacrifice in the centre, was quite powerful, and why black was looking to exchange off, why the engines were looking to exchange off this light squared bishop before that happened, because white's got some interesting tactics based on developing pieces, major pieces, by hitting the loose bishop on g4. So here the engines want to play rook a4 to b4, and well, install the rook on b6 basically, and attack the pawn on c6. So this is how the game went. Queen d1, sort of vaguely looking for maybe something like queen h5. Rook e8, knight c4, exploiting the pin, knight e5, queen h6. And again, I was sort of looking at this position and thinking, well, black must be fine, right? But the engine's actually giving 0.52 for white. Yeah, not quite sure about this. Rook b7, rook b6. I guess it's to make this one weak. But g4, b4, and yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pawns that are quite weak, c6 and a6 in particular. Once white gets those, then passed pawns are on the agenda. It's not very clear to me. Yeah, it's not very clear to me why this should be. Yeah, I would just say it was quite balanced, really. I wouldn't have thought that white would be any better. But the engines tend to prefer white somehow in these types of positions. Again, not very easy, I have to say, to sort of quite fathom really, quite how to make compensation and all that. But what Spielmann did was very natural. He played the move a5, and well, I mean, all sorts of things are happening now. I mean, I'm sure Spielmann was attracted, by one of the things he was attracted with is the possibility to play queen a4, which both threatens bishop c6 and also queen g4, again hitting that loose bishop on g4. This is the type of thing that Spielmann did very well here. But Stahlberg played castles, and obviously queen a4 is possible still, but less interesting. Yeah, you're not going to when you go bishop c6, the king's safe, so you're not going to be able to achieve anything there. But now he followed up with a6, which does make a lot of sense. You feel. The only problem is that it doesn't quite work. It's not quite really giving white any advantage normally. But I mean, this play from the 1930s with rook's pawn pushed to both sides there, and the rook's pawn, very typically for modern engine games, pushed to h6, causes some disruption, and then you just abandon it, castle kingside yourself. I mean, it's really If you told me this was an AlphaZero game, I wouldn't have been amazed, if I didn't know the players. So really quite, yeah, I mean, very, very, very impressive. I really liked it, but it doesn't quite hang together because after rook b8, a takes b7. Here, Stahlberg made a rather strange blunder. Because rook takes b7 is possible in this position, and I mean, you play queen a4, okay, you're getting out of the pin and you're attacking this one and this one, but black can just play knight e7, and after queen g4 you go rook takes b5, and yeah, you're doing fine, right? I mean, rook a7, you play something like queen f6, and you'll just try and get the knight out and then try and win this pawn on h6 eventually. You might end up trading the the g pawn for the h pawn somehow. But I imagine maybe that Stahlberg, he was a point up in the match. Maybe he was, getting quite enthusiastic, and he sort of thought, well, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to, I'm going to play for a bit more. I'm going to either take this pawn on b7 and not give white the opportunity to get anything back, or I'm maybe going to go knight takes b7 to d6. It was maybe kind of an ambitious way to do all this. I think maybe Stahlberg was only really expecting this, and then he thought, well, I mean, either my knight's coming to c5 or to d6. It's going to be very awkward for white like this. Something like that. But in actual fact, after knight d8, white plays bishop a6, and now the engines are saying it's plus 2.1. It just turns out to be really difficult for black to safely pick up this pawn on b7, and that's very much because you've got these tempi hitting the loose bishop on g4 that can bring your major pieces into play. So yeah, it's just a big blunder, and I think that Stahlberg had just completely missed this idea of the rook getting active like that. Well, because his next move seems to show that. Because, I mean, the most natural would be to play a move like f6, I think, and then knight to f7, and then try and get rid of this pawn, maybe, and also be protecting the pawn on g5. Might even have rook f7, when the bishop gets attacked, it can maybe come back in and give some support to the queen side. But Stahlberg played the move Queen F4, hitting the knight on D2. Trying to make it awkward, right? I mean, if you don't have a resource, what are you going to do? Because if you play Queen C2 to defend the knight, I just take on B7. So it doesn't look so bad somehow. But Spielmann answered with Rook A4, which I think came as a big shock there. And yeah, suddenly it's all going horribly wrong. I mean, the big problem is after Queen D2, Rook takes G4. Well, it's actually threatening Rook D1 here, trapping the Queen. So you can't even do that, which is obviously rather inconvenient. So this move Rook A4 was huge, and Stahlberg played Queen F5 just to hold on to the bishop. And now Spielmann played an absolutely gorgeous move, which was the move Queen B4. Very unusual tactic, never seen this before. The Queen and Rook hitting the bishop on G4. Where does the bishop go? Well, it's got nowhere to go. The only square it's got is H5. And now Spielmann plays the move G4 here. Forking bishop and queen. Really nice play. This is really a superb play from Spielmann. So, I mean, Queen C2 was played by Stahlberg. There's various ways of playing, but Queen D4 was Spielmann's choice, a very good choice, defending the knight on D2 and hitting the G7 square. So E5 played, Queen takes E5 and knight E6. Yeah, I mean, your white was also hitting the rook on B8 as well as threatening Queen G7 mate. So knight E6, and now the lovely move Rook D4. You can't take it. The rook's protecting the knight. We're also covering this pawn as well. And, well, we're also threatening just to take the pawn on D5 as well. And that's exactly what Spielmann did on the next move. And, yeah, I mean, you're basically looking, you can either play Rook D6 takes E6, or you can play Bishop C4 takes E6. Get rid of the knight, and then mate on G7. So Queen A4, Bishop C4, Rook takes B7, Rook D6, hitting that knight. Rook E8, and now that there's many ways to win. B3 was played by Spielmann, Queen A3, Rook E1, just lining up on that E6 knight. We're just going to exchange off and then blast through. And after King F8 from Stahlberg, we just got Bishop takes E6, and Black resigned. You simply can't stop White from breaking through after F takes E6. Well, we've got all sorts of moves, but simply stuff even just like Rook takes E6 is just completely winning for White. So here in this position, Stahlberg resigned. Yeah, I mean, one big mistake, I guess, from Stahlberg on move 24 there. Or rather on move 21 rather, this move knight d8, very strange move in some ways, instead of rook takes b7, but I think it was ambition, and I just think he and to be honest, it's not 100% obvious, it just looks bishop a6, sort of protecting the pawn. That can't be great, right? I mean, we're bound to win that pawn. It's right in our territory, we can attack it very easily. But yeah, I think the weakened king side, which was a result of Stahlberg's interesting decision early on. The way that he met the thrust h6, and I think missing this attack along the fourth rank, that was really made possible by Spielmann's move, 15th move knight e5. Quite easy to miss that this was one of the things that just along the fourth rank, an attack on the bishop on g4 was being opened. But yeah, I mean, I really like the game, and this whole thing with the rook's pawns being moved, this pawn on h6 being thrust, causing some weaknesses, then just being abandoned. White castles kingside and doesn't bother about it anymore, just leaves it in there as a long-term weakness that if Black wants to get rid of, it's going to cost him 2 or 3 tempi. Really, really nice, and really, really modern, and a really great example actually of how Spielmann's style by this stage had really evolved into something very rounded, not just a one-dimensional attacking player, even if that was always something that was on his mind, attacking and making combinations. Yeah, I mean, he was a very strong player, Spielmann, and he was a very regular guest in in Sweden. He played a couple of series of matches against the Three Musketeers, they called them, the top three Swedish players of that time. Very strong. Stoltz, Lundin, and Stahlberg. And yeah, I think the first time Spielmann beat Stahlberg and Lundin and lost to Stoltz. And then the other time he beat Stoltz, but then lost to Lundin and lost to Stahlberg as well. So yeah, pretty even all round. But and I think that Spielmann actually, when he had to flee his country due to the Nazis, then Sweden was where he ended up in, where he'd done so much chess in the pre-war years. But anyway, that's. I hope you're enjoying this series. Got a number of games from different players, all from that era, just associated with each other. So I hope that's going to be enjoyable. Lots more games from Leonard to come as well. And thanks very much for watching, and hope to see you at the next videos. Thanks for watching.